Welcome to the Zadzooks Happy Hour. My name is Todd Stoll, and I am joined by 25-year veteran reporter covering pop culture, video games, and technology for the Washington Times, Joseph Zadkowski. Well, it's been a while.
What?
It's been a while.
Oh, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Well,
life happens.
Illness,
people
life.
get sick. I was out of the country. It's all good, and we're back now. And because we're back, we're a little delayed on it, but I think the first thing we should give a thorough and unbiased review of is the Ghostbusters Blu-ray.
All about unbiased.
Okay.
I even watched the 4K UHD version, so we can talk about that too.
Okay.
A little bit.
All right. So, if you're going to watch this movie and you haven't watched it yet, buy the Blu-ray or rent the Blu-ray with the extended release version on it.
And sit next to a female. I'm just telling you. There's something going on. Some mystical mojo with the female population that if you sit next to a female and you're a hardcore Ghostbusters fan, the movie's better.
I didn't have that experience. I actually found that the extended release filled in some gaps that made the theatrical release a bit odd in the way that it was cut. It did add some... It filled in some spaces. I think it gave Kate McKinnon a much more broader and actually funnier platform.
Yeah, and it's surprising because it's only 15 minutes of cuts.
Yeah, but it's mostly her.
It is mostly her. And she's funny.
Yeah.
She really is funny. And there's something about when you watch a movie, if you can get some laughs going in the first 10 minutes, your brain almost goes, okay, I'm going to give him a pass.
Yep.
So as the movie keeps going on, you're going to laugh at things you might not have laughed at the first time through, which is what happened for me.
Yep. I mean, I think the extended release version should have been the theatrical release. I think it would have done a little bit better. It added some additional context and provided some backstory that, quite honestly, I don't get why they cut it from the theatrical release, because I think it added...
Abby has a confrontation with some crazed person.
Right.
Which then explains, and that's kind of a funny thing that happens, and then explains why she's not there at the beginning of this big ghost battle sequence at the end.
Yep.
Better.
Yep. Much better.
As opposed to her just sitting in her apartment reading a book.
Yep. And
there's dance numbers.
Well, the dance numbers I think I could have done without. I think that it didn't really
didn't like the high school cheerleading part?
No.
Okay.
No. The original Ghostbusters had zero dance except for the music video.
Okay.
Which they did dance in.
You being the strictest of Ghostbuster.
Somebody actually, a female actually came to me and said, and I think you said this to me too, but I've now heard it from a couple different people. They thought that this was a satire on Ghostbusters. This was not a reimagination, but it was a satire of it. And, and that's why I think...
I was going to agree with that, and I kept kind of feeling that this was correct, except then I listened to the director and the writer, Feig and what's her name?
DePold.
Yes. And he refers to it as a reboot.
Well,
so out of the director's mouth. So there goes your satire.
If that's really how he feels, then that's unfortunate.
But it's a Ghostbusters for a new generation. That's what he also is pointing out.
I mean, the thing is that he made a movie skewed to a specific demographic. He did not make a blockbuster movie for all audiences, and that's whether he intended that to happen or it's unclear. But that's what happened, and so as a result of that, a certain demographic really kind of clung on to it and said, "This is great. This is funny. I love it." And a certain demographic didn't really understand it, didn't get it, and then the remainder hated it. I didn't really understand it because it just seemed full of kind of hokey gimmicks and forced
Right.
forced bodily humor, laughs.
Right.
And you didn't really get it. You look at that original movie, and then again, it's Dan Aykroyd writing it, and if you look at the Blues Brothers, it's this epic, at the end where the National Guard is going after them and the Blues Brothers. In the end of Ghostbusters, he's got the full, United States military and every possible police officer, and it's really meant to be a little bit of what you would see as like a superhero movie, and it's peppered with comedy, but primarily from Bill Murray, and occasionally from Aykroyd. But that's
Murray
about
has to do very little.
He has to do very little.
Laugh.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And in this movie, it's sort of the polar opposite. It's they don't need help from anyone, and everyone is trying to be that Murray character. And whether you like that or not, I think that's where this movie sort of diverged a bit and had an issue with it. Back to the DVD, I do think that there were segments where there was a little bit more backstory on building the weaponry, which I think I'm always a fan of that. That was the one thing I kind of hated about the initial one, which was there are deleted scenes where the proton packs are plugged into a wall outlet being charged, and they make reference to that in the cartoon a lot where they don't hold their power, and so they cut that out. So there's a lot less focus on the equipment than there is in this movie, which I think is what makes that part fun. And I don't necessarily have a problem with the equipment at all. I actually think it was cool that they reimagined the ghost trap and that they had, these other...
The dual pistols.
The dual pistols. The ghost shredder is pretty awesome.
The ghost shredder is pretty awesome.
It's pretty good. And in general, did a really good job of that. I think I still had issues on the Blu-ray in the sort of not the big boss, but the beginnings of the big fight sequence, making out the ghosts who they were because of, I don't know if it was the color or if it was just the pace in which the camera was moving, but you could never really see who they were fighting. Occasionally you'd see somebody on the ground, and then they'd say, oh, you killed a pilgrim.
So that's why you have to upgrade to 4 times the resolution, the 4K UHD, because it's really great.
Okay.
You can see everything. The green demon, the winged demon in the rock, the Hard Rock show, really impressive.
Well, that was pretty good in the in the theatrical.
It's even better. The ability. I mean, at this point, the human eye can only see a certain resolution, and they're really get the point where they're going to exceed it, right? So I don't know if we're ever going to see something better than 4K ultra high definition.
They'll go 5K.
But the human eye won't even see it.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, it's going to be like you're standing there.
But clearly, when you watch this movie in that format, it is a celebration of visual effects.
Yeah,
it's just the humor doesn't even matter anymore.
Well, and I think that's where people complain about the original too, right? Is the first one they really didn't do anything with special effects, CGI based. I mean, it was all puppets and
which has a great place.
Then drawings on the cells of the film.
There's and there's movies that to this day when you watch them you can appreciate that level of effect.
Poltergeist is a great one.
The Thing.
John
Carpenter's The Thing. I saw that the other day.
I think Aliens.
Right.
I mean, there's something to be said.
Let's go over that in a segment because I did a bunch of horror stuff.
I'll
just whip some horror movies at you in TV, and you can tell me what you think of my picks.
And then the second movie was the reason why Murray hated it, because they pumped too much special effects in it, and it dumbed down the humor.
Right.
And I do feel like perhaps that may have suffered in this rendition as well. If they had pulled it back and not done so much, or maybe gone back to using puppets, which I actually think could have been fairly cool.
So if you watch the featurettes, it's amazing to watch the visual effects guys in action, because they spent a lot of time making sure that the ghosts were actors on the set, and there was a lot of motion capture going on.
All motion capture these days.
And, for example, the giant ghost at the end, what are we referring to him
Rowan?
as? Rowan. Steps on a car and crushes it.
Yep.
They actually crushed a real car and then put his foot over it.
Right.
Which is just, they didn't need to do that.
Right.
They could have just CGI crushed a car.
Yep.
So that's
why their budget was so high.
Yeah.
If they had only removed some of those things and maybe done them CGI.
So I give many kudos to the film for that aspect.
When we get into the sort of backstories, a few things that I think were lost even in the extended edition was there wasn't really a very clear description as to why it's, you know, Times Square is reverted back to an older, more sort of disgusting time.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't even really get explained in the special features. Just all of a sudden, Times Square now looks like it's from Times Square in the 60s and 70s.
And why does Rowan hate humanity so much? It's just because he's a loner and he's been picked on all his life?
It seems that way.
Okay.
Right. So, in the extended edition, though, there's a lot more backstory into how he figured out the technology that is glossed over in the theatrical.
Yes.
And it's because they use the book that Abby and Aaron created, and he figures out a way to essentially open up this portal for bad purposes rather than for good purposes. And they don't really talk about that in the theatrical. I mean, I think there's a very brief thing where they're flipping through and they realize it's the book, but it's in much more detail because she's sitting in her apartment looking through it, and that's right. Really kind of glossed over. And that made a lot more sense and really sort of showed them as kind of a yin and yang of going against each other. And because he's essentially, which they briefly state, I think in one line, he's using the same technology that they would be using. And there's a reason for that, because he's using their playbook against them.
Right.
So in the DVD, in the Blu-ray, there are two different blooper reels.
Right. Oh, but let's go over one more time the presentation, because
you found this
when I was watching this with my wife. All of a sudden the ghosts broke the fourth dimension. They came off and started to float around the black bars. I think it's a 240 aspect ratio, so you got black bars on up and bottom of your screen.
Yep.
Well, the first time you notice it is when the one ghost spews green slime over Abby, and the slime actually comes into the black bar portion of your screen. Which
we then here just looked at to verify it wasn't just your setup.
Yeah.
But so
that's really cool.
But we were talking about this, and what we can't figure out is that intentional? Is that a carryover maybe from the 3D, where they did the 3D first and then they downsampled the 2D and just left it in? Or did they add the special effects sort of post Final Cut in some of these areas and didn't take into consideration the aspect ratio and just let it kind of bleed out like you would if you were using like a Photoshop document and you wanted to have something extend the bleed?
Right, like essentially seeing the mic in your scene.
But in some ways, if that's a screw up, that's brilliant. If it's
it adds a total different dimension to a home theater experience.
And so, but the question is that to you, because you and I didn't even notice it until you told me, but you obviously caught that. I wonder how many people actually realize that that's even there.
Yeah. There's lightning bolts at one point crackling off the screen, which is really cool.
It's very cool. I mean, that is one feature that it's just not published anywhere, which in some ways makes this. Now I kind of want to go back to other movies that have been released recently.
I've never noticed that.
And see if anybody else is doing that. Or is it just a byproduct of taking the 3D and downsampling it to 2D?
Right. I don't know. Okay. All right, so now we're going, unless you want to take a break and then come back to the extras.
No, I think let's just power through.
Okay.
I'm going to say this. You can disagree with me if you want. I don't know the point of the blooper reels. There was nothing in there that was funny whatsoever.
There were two of them.
But there were two of them, and it was basically just a continuation of them flubbing their lines. There wasn't really anything funny. You would normally think of a blooper reel as letting somebody ad-lib multiple lines, and each one of them is hilarious, but it's just not included. And in this case, I got nothing.
So did you get on yours alternate deleted scenes?
Yes, I did.
Okay, which were also
pretty lame. And
did you get like what I call improvisational moments where they take the same line and they come up with something different for that section?
I didn't really feel like that was there. I mean, it was like slightly.
It's over an hour. It's like an hour 15
Yeah.
of this stuff.
Yeah.
And there's not...
It's not funny. I mean, I get why they used what they used. You know,
Was there an insert in your package that had a code that said you can get an additional extra hours worth of stuff if you sign up for Ultraviolet, if you put your code in?
Okay.
Blah 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 blah.
Well, and I'll sort of spin off of that and say the one thing I hate about Ultraviolet, and in this case with what Sony did, because Sony obviously has the proprietary rights to Ultraviolet. I don't like that when I plug a code in that I can't download it and play it in any application that I want. What really frustrated me about this DVD in particular is I was forced to download the Sony Ultraviolet app and have the movie available in digital format in that app. I couldn't pull it out or put it in, say, iTunes or in my media bucket if I were using an Android device. I'm tied to using Sony's proprietary software, which is a real, down point for me. If I buy a movie and it says, it's extended theatrical and digital, I'm expecting that I can pull that digital and take it with me anywhere. That's a huge... I don't know why they're doing that. That's very frustrating from the consumer standpoint.
So can you sign up? What I do is I signed up through Flickster and did it.
Right. But you can't download it out of Flickster.
You can't, because what you're going to...
You have to use the Flickster app to watch it.
I do have a download button on Flickster. But I wonder if it's...
I don't know.
Coded.
Yeah, I think it is. And that was what was sort of... I didn't really like that. It's the first DVD I've ever had that issue with, where it's made me only use their proprietary software. That was a big...
Well, I couldn't even get to the extras.
I couldn't
Supposedly there was an hour's worth more of this stuff, but the code didn't work for me. And it's frustrating because if you're watching a home theater disc, you don't want to be swipping over and trying to upload an app and make sure it works that way too.
It is so frustrating. And the thing is, this is a single disc. I mean, again, we've talked about this before. I think we talked about this with the Aliens edition, is they put the theatrical and the extended release on the same disc. There's no reason to do that. They can put the other version on a second disc. The cost of production isn't going to really be that much more.
Right.
And you can contain all the special features either on a second disc or move the extended version to its own deal and say you've got to, at least you're controlling it via disc. That's a problem. I couldn't get the movie to play once I downloaded it anyway, so it didn't really matter much. There was definitely a glitch going on.
Okay. Now also, did you listen to either of the optional commentary tracks?
I made it through a good portion of Feig's.
Right. Now, Feig's in both of them.
Right.
The second one, he's more of a orchestra leader with 5 other guys.
No, I listened to the one that was just him.
Okay. Him and Kate. Okay. So 2 things that I wanted to bring up was, first of all, I didn't find at any point where he addresses the fact that fans were livid with him over this, which could have made for a really interesting commentary track. At the end of the movie, on the first one with the writer, he kind of acknowledges there's an issue. He acknowledges that they did this as a reboot for a new generation of Ghostbusters fans, but he never comes out and talks about how furious people were or how much they were wanting to kill him for doing this, which could have been interesting. He just completely bypasses it.
Well, and I think you're starting to find, too, that there are just some movies you can't remake. I think if somebody were to come out and say, we're going to redo the Back to the Future trilogy, I don't know how you can redo that.
I can't expect him to come on and commit suicide either, Harry Carey, and go, oh my God, I made such a big mistake. Yeah. I so blew it with this one. I mean, he'd be out of the business.
Well, I mean, if you go back to, Damon Lindelof, who did Lost, I mean, he finally acknowledged he screwed the ending up.
Right.
And but I mean, yes, it's also, when was the commentary recorded? Was it done after the release? Was it done sort of when the trailer, was it before the trailer was released where they were freaking out? Well, he had a
chance because one of them is an extended cut, so I don't know what they did, but he was in New York for one of them and L.A. for another one. And really, once the first trailer came out, he knew he was in trouble.
Yeah.
Because people were already all over. All right. The other commentary track has both visual effects guys talking. Fascinating the whole time. You learn about how you make green slime.
There's just so
you know how to
There's only so many times I can watch a movie though, like because you're basically watching it 3 times with 3 different tracks.
Yeah,
and it's
I understand.
It's just,
and it's a movie you hate to begin with, so there couldn't be more torture involved.
I will say,
hold
watching
on.
the extended
Dead
release,
silence.
I felt okay. I'll give it a pass. It still is terrible. It wasn't as bad as my initial reaction. Now that I was able to digest it on my own and sort of go into it saying, well, I know I'm going to watch this piece of garbage. It was still bad. It wasn't as bad, but I think that also played into the extended release.
Okay.
Because I think if I went back and watched the original version, I'd hate it just as much. Because it just made so much... You could tell, even having seen it only once, I don't know for you, for me, I could tell exactly where the different places where I hadn't seen things before.
Right.
And at the end of it, I was like, all right, I'm kind of into this. This makes a little bit more sense. I'm okay with this. But that's,
Fair enough.
I'm not going to give it 4 stars.
No, I wouldn't ask you to.
It's a pretty solid set of extras. It's just that, some of it is not my cup of tea.
It's a Seth Rogen basket of extras.
Yeah.
Any Seth Rogen movie, you get the exact same. They call it linorama.
Yeah.
Where there's just they throw hours of this stuff at you to listen.
Yeah, and I think, I think some of this is the studio. It's a pretty big production. They want to put a lot of money into the extras and make it pretty solid.
Right.
And I know that just recently, I think Tuesday, iTunes, I think, caught up, or the digital release caught up with all the extras that came out on Blu-ray. I think that they were withholding that so the Blu-ray could come out and people would get the extras, and so it was a couple weeks delayed before it came out on digital as well. But they seem to have caught up a little bit. I can't really tell without buying the movie whether you get both versions or whether you're getting the theatrical release. But that's an option if people are interested.
Okay. Well, that's pretty thorough.
That's a pretty thorough review. It's not. It's not scathing.
No, it's not.
And I don't know. You said that the women you talked to found it funny. Some of the women I talked to found it funny. Some said they wouldn't watch it because they just thought it looked stupid. Some said they watched it and they had a meh attitude. So
no, women I had were all like, "What were you complaining about? We really liked this. This was funny." My girl watched it. She really liked it. And it's a PG-13 movie, right?
It's got a couple F-bombs in it, which makes it kind of hard for the younger kids.
Yeah.
A couple F-bombs and I think there's like a couple instances of, some other figurative language in there.
So anyway.
But, it's...
For the female in your family.
It's harder to watch the first one because Bill Murray is such a creeper in it. I mean, you have to... That one, that's a little bit harder to let a younger group. I think this one actually gets a bit of a pass for the younger audience. The original.
Well, the original has Dan getting...
Yeah, he's
getting trouble with a ghost.
He's getting molested by a ghost in his dream.
Fine.
So, there's that.
All right, I'm going to sneeze, so we got to take a break.
All right, we'll be back.
That's how we determine a break.
Communities Digital News, built by the writers and editors that deliver the news 24 hours a day. Visit comdiginews.com. That's COMMDIGI news.com. And support the next evolution in news.
Okay, let's talk Halloween.
Yeah, I love Halloween. It's my favorite time of the year.
I noticed.
I really love Halloween. Each year I put together a list of what's come out currently that would be defined in the horror genre. And this year I've got like 3 movies that I really found to be awesome in this area and a bunch of TV shows. So I'm going to throw these at you.
Okay.
I'll mention a few things about them, but you throw in any highlights that you have from remembering watching these. So first of all, Carrie, which is the Brian De Palma movie, Stephen King's first novel. There's a collector's edition of that. Shout Factory, by the way, does an unbelievable job with this stuff because they put in everything but the kitchen sink on all these extras, and they just overload, and they'll do 2K or 4K rescans of the movie. Some of these movies are really old, and they're hurting. So they've done a great job of cleaning that up. Great movie, scary movie. Nancy Allen and John Travolta are in it as bad guys. They harass Carrie. And
this is just one of those films that they remade a year ago.
It was a terrible idea.
And it was a terrible idea. It's another film that they should have never touched.
Right. You're right. Because the original, not only the original is a really good movie, but if you go out now and get the Blu-ray, there's like 3 hours of interviews on it. So anyway, fantastic, scary movie.
Yep.
Turn the lights off.
Yep.
Now, Hills Have Eyes is one of these early versions of torture porn movies where there's a family that gets harassed by mutants in a desert. It's Wes Craven, Nightmare on Elm Street.
I don't know why I've never
Craven.
seen this. I can't believe I've never watched this.
It's a bizarre, scary, freaky movie. But once again, this is a company called Arrow Video has released a limited edition of it. They do the best they can considering this movie's from the 70s. They do a great job on it. 3 optional commentary tracks. So you're going to watch... I know you love watching movies over and over again. And then there's an hour-long retrospective on it. And my favorite of the bunch now that I had mentioned is Shout Factory released The Thing, a collector's edition.
Nice.
So that's John Carpenter's Thing, Kurt Russell. Lots of great Broadway theater actors are in this. But the effects basically define the movie.
Yeah.
They are disgusting and grotesque.
You know, the one movie that I never really understood why when they re-released it on Blu-ray because was The Shining, where Sofia Coppola has this like 35 millimeter camera and she's going around filming everyone. And it's never been, I mean, it's out there on the internet. You can find it, but it was never included as an extra. And that is, I mean, it's awesome footage. Like Nicholson's joking around. And I've never really understood why they would never come out with a re-release Blu-ray on that one, do a 4K, and include that, because that is awesome. I'm
sure they will.
It's hidden footage that you're not going to find anyone else shooting. And she was just there, and she had a camera, and she wanted to document it, and she did, and it is awesome.
So do you remember The Thing?
I do remember The Thing.
And the scene where they're on like the autopsy table and the guy's trying to... All right. Anyway.
So how was the coloring and everything?
Fantastic. They did a 4K rescan, and it looks even better than it's a 2K scan of the Ender Positive.
Because I know that
supervised by the cinematographer.
Because
which makes it even better.
I remember that scene being fairly dark.
Yes.
So does it lighten up at all?
Looks fantastic.
Oh, that's great.
And there's a second disc involved with more than 5 hours of content. You can spend your entire Halloween just watching these 3 movies.
So how old is the content?
It's
is
it
mixed. A little bit of new and a little bit of old?
There's some archival documentaries, and there's a great new interview. It's 30 minutes with Mr. Carpenter and his filmmaking buddy Mike Garris, which is really interesting. So yes, there's a little bit of old, there's some new, perfect mix.
Cool.
All right, I'm moving over to TV.
Yeah.
So TV, my absolute favorite, scariest TV show, goofy scary, is Ash vs. Evil Dead. The first season came out, and I'm telling you, if you haven't seen this movie and you have any interest in seeing the return of Ash Williams to the screen, this is your chance. They're 30-minute episodes, easy to digest, and they're fun.
Okay.
Totally fun. And the Blu-ray has an optional commentary track with Bruce Campbell on every one of the tracks.
That's awesome.
Being a smartass the whole time.
That's awesome.
Yes, it is awesome. All right, Walking Dead, the complete 6th season.
Okay.
You know, we know what happened that year. There's problems with Dead Herd. They're trying to get out away from Alexandria.
Yep.
That causes a new set of problems.
Yep.
And it introduces, I'm going to mention there's 7 optional commentary tracks because I know what you're going to get into. And, of course, the end of the season, they mention and show the new villain, Negan.
Yep.
Which takes us a little bit into...
Well, why don't you finish your list,
All right,
and then we'll quickly talk Walking Dead.
American Horror Story Hotel features Lady Gaga as a vampire, and it is really kind of hardcore, not for the family. Not a lot of bonus content, but still great. Preacher Season 1, that's the Evan Goldberg, Seth Rogen vehicle, bringing the amazing Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon, who recently passed away, comic book series to light, it's a fantastic version. You're going to want to watch the 10 episodes. And I got American Crime Story, The People versus OJ, because there's nothing scarier than knowing that this guy got away with this. Okay? Fantastic extras, including a timeline, an interactive timeline to look at like what happened and how it laid out in the trial. I do mention iZombie, this first and second season, just because it's a great idea, and it's kind of a young adult horror show about a woman who becomes a zombie and works at a county morgue, and every time she eats a brain, part of that dead body, the memories infuse in her. So if it's the dead body was murdered, now she's solving a murder case because she knows a little bit about what's going on. All right, we're going back to The Walking Dead.
We are going back to The Walking Dead. Season 7, Episode 1 begins where Season 6 finale ends, which is someone on the core cast is going to die.
Right.
And the first few minutes before the commercial break was nothing but a build-up and then a commercial break. The second segment was more of a build-up with nothing happening and then a commercial break, followed by the brutal killing of a main character, which we will leave it for anyone who has not watched it.
Talk about torture porn.
You want to talk about an episode of torture porn that made me sick to my stomach and question how this got past the ratings board. Season 7, Episode 1 of The Walking Dead, in my opinion, pushed the envelope so far, crossed the line by a mile and a half over anything remotely close to it. The violence, the brutal beatings of humans, the overall torture of characters, the unrelenting torture of characters, the situations in which they're subjected to was so exhausting by the end and so difficult and disturbing to watch. It's not an episode I personally would ever want to go back and watch again. And it really was the definition of torture porn. It was I don't know. I think they took it too far. I think that was just unbelievably unnecessary to air on TV in that version.
I agree. You didn't need to show it. You knew what was going to happen, and it's easy to tell which characters were going to get it.
Yep.
By the time you got into the episode, there was no reason to continue it. It's like, do you even know who directed that? Did Greg Nicotero?
Nicotero did.
Well, I understand his fascination.
And I think Kirkman wrote it.
I understand his fascination with makeup effects, and he has a huge background.
Oh, hey, that. I mean, he is a legend for sure. It was.
And critics are furious.
Yes,
there's groups that just won't watch the show anymore.
I mean, what I did was I streamed it online and watched live Twitter on the Walking Dead hashtag, and the 75 to 85% was I'm done with this show. I can't. This is unacceptable. This is
right.
A lot of it was there is no reason you needed to hold back on one of the deaths because two characters, main characters die, not just one. The second one is more of a surprise, even though it's direct from the comics. But everyone felt there was no need to do a cliffhanger, that it could have carried into a very, desolate and despairing situation for the main cast. And I think that there were times where they literally could have ended the episode and extended it into another one, but it was just an hour and a half of unrelenting torture and anxiety and stress and frustration that a lot of people were very upset about. And I think it was unnecessary to go that violent on an episode to put the point across of a character who is meant to be brutally violent.
And the thing about it is, if you do something like that in a movie, you can get away with it sometimes because your villain will pay the price in a 2-hour span.
Yep.
You're going to know what's going to happen. You know the guy's going to get it.
Yep.
In this, you're now going to have to sit through probably one season
or more
or 2 seasons of this guy oppressing this group of individuals week after week with no resolution.
Yep.
Which is just going to make it even worse.
And I think, and honestly, I think they sort of blew their wad a little bit up front. And I think the next couple episodes are just going to be, they're going to drag. Right. And then it's going to come up to some sort of, mediocre mid-season cliffhanger, right, which will tick people off. And the fact is I think they're booked through 10 seasons now. There's some. I know that they're definitely
just signed up 8.
They're done through 8 for sure. I don't see this going away, but I do see. And I haven't even seen the numbers yet because they're still compiling DVR and everything, and you probably won't get the final numbers until season or episode 2 comes out. But yeah, it was. My feeling was that this was an NC-17 style film that you weren't aware that you were going to be watching. It was like that. Granted, it said there's going to be, there was the typical Walking Dead. There are elements of this feature which are disturbing for some audiences.
Right.
But it wasn't. This is going to be really disturbing, and you should be aware of it. And I really think...
And you're used to that with Walking Dead because they continually brutalize zombies.
Yeah, but that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Right. When you get into brutally murdering, people who are alive...
Revered cast members,
and who are revered. And, it really... It followed the comic book too closely. And the comic is very violent. And it really... Even with the governor in the earlier seasons, he's not as brutal as he is in the comics, and in this one it came too close. And I don't know. I think that people were genuinely. I'm gonna need to go see my therapist tomorrow. It was just like that. It was too long and too drawn out and too violent and believe me, I love me some violence, but this was like, okay, that's just. Now you're just doing it because you think it's fun.
Right.
And it wasn't...
Because you're trying to pull off an effect.
Yeah, again, it was sort of exploding an entire intro to a character you already know is completely difficult.
Right.
And you see that, and you see he's unrelenting, and you see him breaking the main character. But there are ways to do that without being so vicious.
Right.
And... we could be having this discussion with the season 8 premiere, which is 10 times as violent as season 7, and season 7 looks like Christmas time.
Ugh, please.
But at some point, I think this may be the turning point where the show jumped the shark and people are going to start really bailing out.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll watch the numbers for you.
I'm sure that the numbers will be fairly good. It's Halloween and.
It'll be that's true.
It'll be fine. They always have the same problem where they split the season up, and people get really annoyed that they have to wait for the second half. And then the second half, the first 4 or 5 episodes are awful, and then they always do this big climax at the end, and then they cliffhang you.
Yep.
For a year.
Yep.
That's all I got on The Walking Dead.
So, put that in your trick or treat bag and smother and choke on it.
It was so disturbing.
Happy Halloween.
Yeah. All right.
We may be back next week. It depends if one of us gets sick or
we'll be back.
Break something.
We'll be back. We're we're recording on a different night. And it's a little bit better.
We're gonna have a live execution next week.
Next week.
We're gonna brutalize someone with a bat.
Yep.
And
we're gonna kidnap a trick or treater, keep him in my basement for a week, and
that's right. Hey.
That'll be that.
Censors.
It's awful.
Or don't reveal our plan for God's sakes. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.